Hello, welcome back. In this video I'm going to go through the cultural differences between Brazil and Sweden. And as you can imagine, there are some big ones. So in this video I'm going to talk about the 7 major differences. So let's begin. Okay, so the first cultural difference is how people greet and interact with each other. So here in Brazil, when a woman and a man meet, and this can be strangers, usually they hug and kiss each other. While in Sweden, usually it's just a handshake. And this was a shock for me when I moved from Sweden to Brazil. I was just used to shaking everyone's hand, and people started coming over and wanting to kiss me all the time. And another confusing thing was the fact that sometimes the greeting is one kiss on one cheek, and sometimes it's a kiss on both cheeks. And so at the beginning when I moved to Brazil, I was totally confused and flustered, and I didn't know what to do every time I greeted a woman. But I've got used to it, and now I kind of just think it's normal. But it isn't just the greeting, it's also the social interaction. So Brazilians in general are a bit more warm and friendly, and it's very common for Brazilians to strike up conversations with strangers. So if you're like in the supermarket or in a queue or something, it's very common for the person next to you to suddenly start talking to you and chatting about their day or their family or something. And this very rarely happens in Sweden. So Sweden people are very reluctant to talk to strangers, and Swedish people take a long time before they start opening up and chatting to other people. And also in terms of helping each other as well, Brazilians are more willing to help a stranger. So if someone asks for directions or something, it's very easy to get help in Brazil. And also another very common one is getting your car stuck in the sand at the beach. And there's always someone nearby who's willing to help you get the car out. Now in Sweden you also can get help. It just takes a bit more, and not everyone is willing to help you because you're a stranger and they don't know you. Okay, so that's the first cultural difference. So Brazilians are a bit more warm and friendlier. The second cultural difference is partying and socializing. So Brazilians love their parties and their celebrations, and that kind of ranges from the massive parties they have at Carnival, which happens in February, which lasts for days and is massive. And then Brazilians have lots of smaller get-togethers with friends and families, and a very common one is to have barbecues on Sunday where they invite over friends, family and neighbors, and they have a little barbecue. Now Swedish people, they also like their parties, but in general they have fewer parties, and these parties are usually more modest and smaller. And there's definitely no tradition of inviting friends, family and neighbors over every Sunday for a barbecue. And one good example of the differences is the Carnival celebration. So like I said, this is massive in Brazil, happens in February time when it's summertime in Brazil. You have these massive celebrations in Rio de Janeiro with those parades. But then also what's very common is for Brazilians to go to the beach during this time and have parties at the beach. And these parties can last for days and are big events. Now Sweden also has carnival celebrations in February, but this carnival celebration involves eating a semla. So semla is this bun with cream and marzipan and cinnamon and sugar. And Swedish people eat this to celebrate Carnival or the beginning of Lent. So you can kind of see the differences here in the countries. So in Brazil, during Carnival they party for days and go crazy. In Swedish people, they go to the cafe and eat a semla. Another thing is the consumption of alcohol at parties and social events. So Swedish people need alcohol in order to relax and be able to socialize. And Swedes like beer and wine as well, but we also like snaps, which is flavored vodka, which is pretty strong. And in general, Swedish people drink a fair bit of alcohol. Now Brazilians, they also like their alcohol, they like their beer a lot, but Brazilians don't need alcohol to be able to have a good time and let their hair down a bit like Swedish people do. So cultural difference number 3 is punctuality. So Brazilians in general arrive late to things. Now Brazil is a big country, and it depends on where you live in Brazil. Now I live in the south of Brazil, and here in the south people are better at arriving on time. But in general, if you agree a time with a Brazilian, don't expect them to arrive exactly on time. This also depends if it's a work environment or a social environment. So at work, again, they can arrive a bit late, but like 5, 10, 15 minutes. But at social events, at parties and stuff like that, they can arrive 1 hour or 2 hours late. This is very different to Sweden. So in Sweden you arrive on time, and sometimes a bit early sometimes. And that's for everything from work meetings to parties to just get-togethers. So if you agree on a time, that's when you should arrive. And if you don't, Swedish people get annoyed. So beginning when I moved to Brazil, this was a big cultural difference for me. And when I was invited to parties, I would arrive on time, but I would be the only one there. And it would take up to an hour before other guests arrived. Okay, so cultural difference number 4 is planning. So we Swedes, we love to plan things well in advance. So say you want to meet up with some friends, you can kind of plan that a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks in advance. Everyone puts it in the calendar and that's when they meet up. In Brazil in general, this doesn't happen, and Brazilians can't do it very well. So for example, if I want to meet up with some friends and I say, oh, let's meet up next week on this day. And they're like, yeah, that sounds good, but I can't confirm anything right now because I'm not able to plan that far ahead. Let's agree something like a day or 2 before we meet up. God knows how many times I've tried to do this with Brazilians and it nearly never works. It's just, I haven't quite worked out whether they have a difficulty doing that or they just don't want to plan ahead like that. And obviously there are exceptions, so like weddings, wedding invites get sent out in advance and people put it in their calendars. But less important social events, they just don't want to plan in advance like Swedish people do. And another thing connected with that as well is kind of agreeing to do something in the future. So it's very common for Brazilians to see someone they know and they chat a bit with them and then they say, oh, let's meet up next week and have a barbecue, or let's meet up next week and go to a restaurant. And the other party's like, oh yeah, let's do that. But then in a lot of cases they just say that, they don't actually mean that. And for me that was very difficult to understand, because if you say to a Swedish person, let's meet up next week, that Swedish person expects to meet up next week and usually wants to agree on a date to meet up well in advance. And I've got many examples of this where I met someone and they said, let's meet up next week, and I go, great, but then I wait a few days, I don't hear anything, and then I call them and ask them, so what day did you want to meet up? Then they're like, oh no, I can't do it this week. And I got all confused because they said they would and now they can't. But now I realize that in a lot of cases it's just an expression. Okay, so cultural difference number 5 is appearance. So in Brazil, appearance is very important, especially for women. So Brazilian women in general, they go to the hairdresser a lot, and nails very frequently, they go to the gym a lot, and also they dress up and wear a lot of makeup as well. And that's quite a big contrast to Swedish women. So Swedish women are a bit more relaxed about their appearance, about their clothes, how much makeup they wear. There are occasions where you have to dress up a lot, weddings and birthdays and stuff. Kind of day to day and smaller get-togethers and stuff. It's just a bit more relaxed about what you wear and so on. And also the type of clothes as well. Brazilian women in general dress up a bit more sexy than Swedish women, and you can definitely see that at the beaches with the small bikinis. Well, that's a bit less common than with Swedish women. Now with men, I would say generally it's the same thing. So kind of Brazilian men are a bit more focused on appearance in terms of grooming, the haircut and the beard and everything, and the clothes. And in Sweden it's just a bit more relaxed, and men are a bit less focused on the clothes they wear and how well groomed they are. And I definitely saw that at work. So I've worked in an office both in Brazil and Sweden, and definitely in Brazil the men I worked with were a lot more focused on the clothes they wore and that they were well groomed, while in Sweden in general the men are less concerned about that. There's no right or wrong here, it's just different, and for me it was easy to adapt to. I just had to get my hair cut a bit more often and invest a bit more in clothes. And culture difference number 6 is the work culture. So in general, my impression is that Brazilians, they work more than Swedish people. So the work week in Sweden is 40 hours, and here in Brazil it's 44 hours, which is a bit longer. But having worked in both countries, my impression is that here in Brazil people work more than that. I'm talking here about working in a big company in an office, While in Sweden it's a lot more common for people to work there 8 hours per day and then just go home at that time. Another indication of that is the maternity leave. So here in Brazil the maternity leave is 4 months, but I think it can be extended to 6 months. But in Sweden the paternity leave, so both mum and dad can be off work looking after baby, and in total it's 16 months. And so the mum can be home for part of that, and then the dad can use the rest of it and be home as well. And so the Swedish culture is very focused on this work-life balance and helping young families when they have babies. And here in Brazil there's definitely less focus on that. Okay, so the final cultural difference is sport. And here in Brazil, football is the main sport. So people love to watch football on TV, and people love to discuss how the teams are doing, especially Brazilian men. And then also people play a lot of football as well. So that's normal football outside, and also indoor football or futsal as well is very popular in Brazil. And then when it's World Cup, it goes even more crazier and the country grinds to a halt and nothing gets done during the World Cup basically. Now there are other sports, so there's volleyball and beach tennis and stuff, but football is definitely the major sport in Brazil. Now in Sweden football is also very popular and a lot of people watch it and play it as well, but you also have some other sports which are very big in Sweden, and that includes ice hockey, skiing, tennis, athletics. So here in Sweden football doesn't dominate as much the sport as it does in Brazil. And also when I go out with friends, I talk a lot less about football with my Swedish friends than I do with my Brazilian friends. But maybe one of the reasons why Swedes aren't that focused on football is that Sweden isn't the best at football compared to Brazil, which is definitely one of the best. Okay, so I hope you found this video interesting. So these were kind of the big cultural differences that I found when I moved from Sweden to Brazil. And with most of these, it didn't take that long to get used to. I mean, you learn pretty quickly how to kiss a woman on the cheek and arrive a bit late to a party. So none of these differences were major or caused me lots of difficulty. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel. If you've got any questions or anything, leave it in the commentary below. So thanks for watching, until next time.